Hello, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Welcome to VUX World as we approach our fourth birthday. I'm your host, as always, Kane Sims, and we have a fantastic discussion lined up for you today. You will have noticed that Gartner released the Magic Quadrant, the first time they've ever done the Magic Quadrant for enterprise conversational AI companies. And although it's not officially kind of released, if you have a look at it, you can kind of see, it's blurred out, but you can read it and you can kind of see who's in that leader spot. And one of those companies is Cognigy, and we're speaking to the CEO, Philipp Heltewig, today in just a moment. But before we do introduce Philipp, we are going to say a shout out to our presenting sponsors, Deepgram and Symbl.ai. If you are not familiar with Symbl.ai, we actually did a podcast with Subi Rathor, who is the CEO of Symbl.ai, last week. It's not part of the sponsorship or arrangement. It was genuinely a podcast we've been lining up, and it was absolutely unbelievable. Symbl.ai make it super, super easy for you to be able to build powerful coaching, like agent assist coaching conversations, call tracking functionality for your customer experience solutions. It's conversational intelligence, essentially. It's a suite of APIs that you can utilize. You can monitor calls, videos, text conversations, and you can apply best-in-class conversational contextual AI in no time at all. And you can actually get started for free. The use cases that it enables is absolutely tremendous. It is absolutely unbelievable. Look, the world is your oyster, and you're only limited by your imagination. So do check out Symbl.ai, Symbl.ai to learn more. That's SYMBL.ai for those listening on the podcast. Check that out. It's definitely worth it. And our other presenting sponsor is Deepgram. If you are creating voice assistants, voice bots, conversational agents that require the ability to take people's speech and turn it into text so that you can feed your NLU, you'll be hard pushed to find better than Deepgram. It's incredibly accurate. You can actually retrain the models based on your unique use case in your industry. It is highly cost effective, and they will actually baseline your use case against other speech to text providers, ASR providers. So they will actually do a baseline, and you can see for yourself how accurate it is. So to learn more about that, go to deepgram.com/VUX world. That is deepgram.com/VUX world. Now, without further ado, let's welcome Philipp Heltewig, CEO of Cognigy, who is having a very good day today, I expect.
That's right. Couldn't be better, really.
Nice. Well, first of all, congratulations. I know we can't get too deep into the Magic Quadrant discussion because there's all kinds of embargoes on the scene until a certain period of time is released. But you can see that if you look in that quadrant in the press release that was released, it's all blurred out, but I can definitely make out the name Cognigy in that leader position. And so you did make it into the leader quadrant. So congratulations.
That's right. Yeah, thank you very much. It's actually we actually have approval to say that we are a leader in the Magic Quadrant, and yeah, I think it's a great testament to what we've been doing over the past 5 years, company strategy, and of course, especially the product, right? And yeah, so when this came out yesterday, we had an all hands meeting in the company and celebrated, and it was fantastic.
Nice. 5 years, not that long, really. I mean, this podcast's been going, and VUX World's been going for 4 years. And I remember when I bought the domain name was in June 2017. It was probably about 6 months or so after Cognigy kind of got going, and that time seems to have just absolutely flown by. So you must still feel as though you're just getting started, does it? Or does it feel as though things have moved on tremendously over 5 years?
Well, I think both, right? It's when I think about Cognigy, I still think, yeah, we're kind of like a small startup, but we are not really a small startup anymore. We're one of the biggest players in the world with many offices around the world, and now a leader in the Magic Quadrant, leader in enterprise conversational AI. And it's not just us that has grown a lot. I think the industry overall has grown and matured a lot, right? When we started, it was all about NLU, and at first it was all about voice. Yeah, chat doesn't matter; it's all about voice. And then that changed, and then chat became really big and became its own category with messaging and all that, right? And then voice came back with direct integrations into the contact centers, and also the expectation towards bots, I think, has changed, right? Whereas a couple of years ago, when you came to a new customer, nobody really knew anything about conversational AI, and they just heard AI. And we actually had a scene once where a customer gave us collection of PowerPoint slide decks and said, okay, you can give this to the bot to read, right? And I was like, okay, that's not really how it works. And now we're having very different discussions, of course, with teams around the world. Most large enterprises now have teams that are specialized on conversational AI, right? Center of excellences. And you don't need to go in and explain the benefits of why voice bots or why chat bots anymore. I think the industry and the people working it have come a long way as well.
So we've got a shout out from Mike Novak. Go Cognigy. You've got a fan there paying attention. Yeah, you're right. The industry is definitely developed, and it's interesting to see these center of excellences pop up, and we'll get into that discussion in a short while in terms of some of the other trends that we're seeing and how organizations, as they develop center of excellences, as they develop more solutions and start to scale those solutions, what kind of critical requirements is there, and that you would kind of advise them, and what other kind of like traps is there that people might get themselves into. And essentially, I think that now there is a good degree of people who have, or companies that have kind of got to a point where they are doing a good degree of volume and are having a good degree of success. They've got a good degree of capability. It's nice to have the discussion now, I think, because there's still equally a lot of companies just getting started. And now, finally, we can actually point to things and say, this is what good looks like. Whereas 5 years ago, perhaps we couldn't really do that.
That's right. And I mean, 5 years ago, I think there were a lot of examples of what good doesn't look like, right? Because the technology wasn't there. But also, I mean, there's technology, right? There is natural language understanding technology. There is the technology to actually build and model the bots. But then there was also no real understanding about, okay, conversation design, right? Maybe 5 years ago, that term didn't even exist, right? Or at least not a lot of people knew anything about it. Whereas now, I think the focus has shifted from let's build an all-knowing AI in customer service towards, okay, let's build something that helps the customer, right? It doesn't have to sound like C3PO or whatever, some advanced AI, right? As long as it can quickly help. And look at voice bots, for example. Whereas 5 years ago, companies would have gone and said, okay, we're going to build a voice bot, and it has to be able to resolve 80% of cases when people call the contact center. This is not really the right way to approach this, because you need to build all of these different use cases, right? Whereas now companies realize, okay, let's start maybe with the top 3 things. We're also not greeting the customer with, hey, how may I help you? But instead of, hey, welcome to XYZ, I can help you with 1, 2, 3, or I can connect you to an agent. How can I help you today, right? So much more guided conversation design that actually helps to resolve issues quicker. And so it's a mixture of better technology, better tooling in general, but also the way to design the interactions, right? Because just like maybe in 1995, you probably didn't have a lot of website designers, and then we kind of got the hang of it and how to do things, how to build good user experience on websites. And 5 years ago was probably like the 1995 or even the 1992 in conversational AI, where nobody really knew how to do it right because we didn't have any experience. Whereas now there is a whole lot of experience already, and certain frameworks and certain methodologies are establishing itself, right? And that's why the conversational AI solutions we're seeing in the market now work much better than a couple of years ago.
It's interesting that, yeah, the whole conversation design community is definitely thriving, and we evangelize for that time and time again on the podcast, and also, the work that we do and stuff. And I think that, maybe this is one lesson, I suppose, for those just getting started. And it'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on the importance of that design element, because ultimately that's all there is with an invisible interface. That's based on conversations. The design part is basically all there is. The technology behind it is just fueling the actual conversation, and so there's nothing else to it. Whereas, you probably see some of those more mature teams focus on that, have teams and people dedicated to doing that. But is that your kind of your viewpoint as well, that when people are getting started, you notice that it's maybe more led by technicians and engineers as opposed to having a design input?
Definitely, right? Because I mean, conversational AI really came from the natural language understanding industry. Natural language understanding in itself is not really a tool set, right? But it's a technological thing that was mainly used by programmers who then build the conversations in code afterwards. what we are doing, for example, when you start using Cognigy, we have training courses on conversational design that are available for free. Questions like, okay, should I give my bot a personality? Is that important? Right. I personally, for me, when I use bots, I don't consider it important because I don't want to ask a bot. Let's say I'm dealing with an airline bot. I'm not going to ask the bot when Barack Obama was born or what the weather is in New York, unless I'm flying to New York. Maybe then it's interesting, right? So this whole small talk aspect, that's big too. Should I add small talk to my bot? Is it really adding value to my customer? And there's different aspects, right? If you have a bot in retail, it's a bit more playful, maybe yes. If you have a bot that helps you to find support tickets in your support ticket system, it probably doesn't need to be able to have a small talk, right? So we're trying to guide users in picking the right way, right? In adding these features or not. So we have these training classes, but also the tool itself needs to guide users in doing things right. Not just going like, okay, you can do anything, go off and do it, right? But really going like, okay, you want to build a bot for X, here is a best practice of how to do that.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. The personality side of things combined with conversation design, I think can have an impact in places where it can help multiple designers that are working on one thing understand the kind of language to use. Not everyone needs to have a name, for example, depending on the user goals, as you said. Something that is an airline bot, very utilitarian, very transactional. Probably can dial down the personality. It's a case of whether you kind of want to use there's a really good use case in the kind of debt collection space where I can't remember the name of the company, which is that the persona was a bit personified. I think it might be in Webio that did it. The personality was a bit personified, didn't have a name, but it used a little bit of slang. It used like "hey" for a greeting and stuff. So it's like taking what is like a tense situation potentially, and maybe he's diffusing some of that tension, being a little bit more kind of like relaxed and helping people feel more comfortable and stuff like that. But I think that it's horses for courses, without a doubt. And I think that horses for courses basically. But it's interesting how
it's very interesting, right? Because maybe to just quickly comment on that.
Yeah.
What you've just described, the decision, should I give my bot a personality that can help diffuse an attention-laden situation? Is that a decision that should lie with a JavaScript developer who's coding the bot? The answer is probably not, right? I love JavaScript developers. I'm a JavaScript developer, but I probably shouldn't make the decision either, right? The decision should be then made by someone who knows something about that. It could be a linguist, it could be a psychologist, right? I mean, and all of a sudden, and that is the thing, all of a sudden you're getting to a level that is about communications. Very similar to something you're doing in marketing or maybe even in copywriting, where you talk about how will the person that I'm communicating with perceive this when it's said like this, right? As you say, do I greet them with hey, or do I greet them at all? And do I say like, hey, my name is X, like the bot's persona, things like that, because all of that will elicit a certain response, right? Of course, if I have a playful bot and then people try out things like, oh, I love you, so just see what the bot says. I don't know how often you've put I love you into the Amazon search box. Probably not that often, even though it's going to have a product for you with that. But if you have a very utilitarian bot and you write I love you and it goes like, sorry, all I can do is find support tickets for you, give me the support ticket number, then okay, that's it, right? So personality drives the way that customers interact with the bot and ultimately the success, right? I get it. I mean, if you build a bot for a TV show or something like that, probably should have a personality, right?
Do you think that, like, we're talking about how companies have developed and advanced in their approaches, and we'll get more into that in a while. Do you also think that the end users have also developed a degree of maturity? Like, are you noticing with your customers and your deployments that people are asking things like, "What's the weather?" and "Are you real?" and stuff like that? Are people still using bots as like a novelty thing, or are people quite happy and quite used to now bots that just do certain things and then kind of just get on with it? What's your observations about from the maturity on the user side?
It's actually it's all over the place. Like I wish I could say we as users have matured enough to know how to communicate with these bots and how to phrase things so that the bot most likely understands it. This is true for me. Not sure it would be so true for my parents, for example, right? And sometimes, let's say, I mean, because of GDPR and so on, we don't usually get insights into what the bots are saying to our customers' bots. But we have some demo bots also on our website, and if you saw some of the stuff that people put in there, like you would need to beep a lot on this podcast. It's pretty crazy, because I think this is also the conundrum of a demo bot. People call a demo bot to try and trick it into making a mistake. People don't call an airline bot to try and trick it into making a mistake, but to change their booking, right? Yeah. So maybe when they interact with a real life bot, they have matured a little bit. Also through the what are they called? Voice assistants. Amazon's device. I can't say her name. She's back there. Or Google Home, right? We know that we're not going to use very lengthy phrases to describe what we want, but we do it in more of a command style, right? And yeah, so that's I guess so. We have matured in a way. But there's still so many people. Debt collection is a good example. We have several companies that use Cognigy for debt collection. And yeah, swear word detection, level of aggression, sentiment detection is very important in those cases, right? You are dealing with people that in 30% of cases don't realize that they're talking to a bot.
Interesting.
Which, by the way, is also a conversation design problem. I think that it should always be made clear that this is not a human. We should never try to emulate that. That's not going to work.
Yeah. Do you think is that because it sets unrealistic expectations, or is it the ethical thing about tricking people that they're talking to a human?
I don't think anyone's intentionally tricking people into thinking that they're talking to a human. That can only backfire. If anyone's doing that and was listening in today, I advise not to do that. I think it's just that if the bot doesn't make clear that they're a bot, especially on a phone call, the text-to-speech algorithms are so good these days. If you look at the neural voices that Microsoft, Google, or Amazon have, for example, and there's many specialized providers out there as well, they are so good that just from the tone of the voice, it's difficult to hear that it's not a human. Right. You should still make that clear. You say, okay, I'm the automated debt collection system, something like that, right? Because then the responses from the human will be aligned.
Yeah, right? That makes sense.
Like
what are your kind of like? So those companies that have been doing it quite a while, they have a process. They're likely to be almost in like maintenance and scale mode. And we'll maybe get into some of the kind of like either blind spots that people find as they go into that kind of phase. But in order to get into that phase, in order to become mature, in order to have something of a degree of scale, you need to kind of do something first, don't you? You need to kind of get started, and there'll be a lot of either people listening who work within organizations who haven't deployed a bot in a call center or a chatbot yet, companies that will be thinking about it. What's your advice for people just getting started? Is there a specific process that you advise they follow? Is there a specific framework or methodologies that you advise? Like, what would your advice be on the process of getting people up and running? And then we'll move on to as that advances and scales.
It depends a little bit on the type of company that you are or that you're working for, right? If you are a very small business, then I would advise you, okay, just get going, right? Go get a tool out there that can support your type of expenditure, right? There are very cheap tools. There are even free tools out there that you can get started with. But of course, they will not really be enterprise level tools. Now, why is my advice different for enterprise customers? There are a couple of, let's say, special requirements that enterprises have when it comes to things like conversational AI or almost any software. And I think this is something important to realize. Conversational AI is just like any other enterprise software. You still have the same requirements on GDPR, on logging and alerting, on integration into corporate logging frameworks, on failover resilience, internal SLAs, security requirements, etc., etc. So the advice there would be, okay, before you get started, make sure that the tool you're using to get started, because almost all the tools you can just get started with tomorrow, right? You can go to Cognigy's website and start a trial immediately, right? You don't even need to confirm an email or anything. You're just in immediately. So getting started is easy. But is it the right tool for you to also bring something into production? Because there's a difference of, I'm going to play around with this and try it out, versus I'm going to bring it into production, right? When you look at security, I think this is, especially for large enterprises, is hugely important. How can I collaborate with multiple employees on a bot, right? Are there security settings so that Kane can do everything in a bot, Phil can only work on the NLU, Kane can see the analytics, Phil can only see the analytics in one language, etc., etc. So it's very fine granular security settings that are required by enterprises, right? Can there be 10,000 projects on the platform? Like we have many customers that have hundreds or even thousands of projects on their Cognigy instances, where employees from all over the world are working on different projects and they're completely separate, right? So all of these kinds of things all of a sudden become very important when you talk about deploying conversational AI in an enterprise context. And that's not something you usually think about when you get started. You think about how good is the NLU, how easy is it to build the bot, what are the features of the bot. All of that is great, all of that is super important. But what's also important is that the software you are picking is actually the right one for your size of company.
Interesting. I think a lot of people, like, you've got two kettles of fish, haven't you? You've got one side, which is kind of companies, large companies that have very defined procurement processes that don't do things really as, like, they might experiment a little bit, but if they commit to something, then they're kind of going to commit to it, sort of thing. So you've got long procurements and you've got very detailed requirements and all that kind of stuff that can take quite a while. At the same time, you've got companies that might have a bit more of an agile kind of approach that, they can try something and get moving and rolling with it and stuff like that. What are your observations on how companies are approaching that? In your kind of experience, are people, utilizing Cognigy because they want something, like you said, that they can get into and play with quickly, but have something that they can move to production and scale? Or are you finding that more organizations are undergoing large procurement processes and wanting all of these things, like security elements and stuff like that, defined up front? What's your kind of observations on where organizations begin that kind of procurement?
It's funny. I think these days it's actually a mix, even for the larger enterprises. So you can get pilots running very quickly without going through a procurement or anything like that. So limited pilots where then a certain use case is built and tried out for a couple of weeks, something like that. But then, of course, once it's supposed to go into production, when the proper licenses have to be purchased, support agreements have to be put in place, then it's hardcore enterprise procurement, right? And this is, but of course, maybe I have a slightly biased view on the market as well, because we are dealing in most cases with very large enterprises around the world, right? We might have a handful of small business customers, but not really. Right, so this might be different for other tools that are in the market. But for us, it's yes, we regularly, for almost every customer, we see the 100-page security questionnaires that we need to work through and stuff like that. So that's very common. Data processing agreements to be GDPR compliant, etc. We do see that almost every day. Yes.
And during those kind of exercises, the example you gave there of the company that's using them in multiple language, multiple different countries and stuff like that, is that usually a starting point? Or is it usually we want to bring something in and do that due diligence, but we want to use it in this market for this use case? Or are there broader plans in terms of we want to bring something in that we know we're going to have used across the globe?
We usually see two types of approaches there. We see the contact center techies, let's just say, coming, and then these are the teams that also manage your Genesys or Avaya or Cisco infrastructure. They are coming and saying, okay, we need a mature conversational AI platform that can work with our contact center of choice. And so it's driven from the contact center, from the customer experience side, right? And then that is the use case, and they're usually getting started in one market and then expanding from there. So that's one way. The other way is the center of excellence for automation, which is usually in the IT department, right? So those are usually the same folks that are also taking care of things like RPA, UiPath, you name it. So then it comes from that side where they say, okay, we are the center of excellence where if anyone wants to automate something in the enterprise, they come to us. And we have RPA already in our bag of tools that we can use. And now we also want conversational AI. And then they bring us in, for example, and then they can offer that internally to the enterprise, right? So we have both types of cases.
And how much? Because it sounds, you've definitely thought about the real details of how to sell to large complex organizations, and the security side of things. Where's it hosted? Obviously, if you look at even like AWS, for example, you don't really have a great deal of flexibility about where that's hosted. If you're going to use Lex or something like that, you kind of have to pick a cloud somewhere depending on how on where that is and all that kind of stuff. You can't really run it on premise. I don't know whether Cognigy can or not. I'm sure we can get to that. But I think that having that level of detail around understanding exactly the kind of checklists that these enterprises are gonna need in order to implement something is really sensible. Do you think that, because I'm seeing obviously you spent a long time at Sitecore, large enterprise grade CMS. Has all this stuff come from your experience at Sitecore, and what did you learn there that you've kind of applied to Cognigy? Is this in part some of that?
Yeah. It's actually funny when we sold Sitecore in 2016, and I then founded Cognigy together with my co-founder Sasha and Benny. I said, okay, I'm not going to do something different. I'm not going to do enterprise software. We're going to build an end user device, and we're actually going to build a talking teddy bear that we're going to sell to the world, and then talking all kinds of things, like maybe a talking baby Yoda, or for the insiders, Grogu, right? But it didn't come to that. We pivoted back to enterprise software, and here we are. And so I guess a lot of the enterprise experience that me and my co-founders, and also a lot of the people that we brought in, we do have a couple of people from Sitecore as well, that we have helped us to get a foothold in this enterprise space, right? It is difficult selling to enterprise, but it is also it's also less risky, right? There are much fewer deals, of course, that you do. The deals are bigger and they're much stickier, right? We have a 0% churn rate amongst our large enterprise customers, right? So, and that is because if an enterprise really commits, then they commit for a long time. There's a big difference to the way that we sold at Sitecore, because at Sitecore it was usually you get an RFP, everyone is invited in the industry, everyone pitches their proposals, and then maybe there's a demo during the RFP, and then the winner is chosen, and then that license is purchased, and then there's like a 5-year contract. Now, what we are seeing with this technology here is because conversational AI technology hasn't been around for as long as content management technology has, or CRM technology, or something like that, right? So companies usually want to run a pilot. So they might do an RFP, and then they whittle it down to 3 or 2 companies. Then they run a pilot where they check all of these things. Can it integrate into our enterprise infrastructure, right? Does it do all the things that we need it to do? What does it even sound like? Sometimes we have pilots that go live for a couple of weeks on the phone lines to see, can we hit those deflection rates that are actually advertised? So there seems to be a much stricter evaluation process in place to see whether the technology can actually deliver. And that is, of course, because most large enterprises, whilst they might have some small conversational AI deployments here or there, don't yet have 10, 20 years of experience in the technology and the value it can bring, right? So it's a little bit different, but it's great for us because we always say, well, what we're advertising, we can also deliver, right? There's no smoke and mirror stuff that's on our website that can't actually be done. So it gives us a good opportunity to prove the value of the software throughout the pilot. And at the end of the pilot, that also, in comparison to Sitecore, usually means we can close larger contracts, right? Because then it's like, okay, we see the value this can bring, and now we're going big, right? So that is a distinct advantage of that.
Speaking of value, this is a question that we have in the chat here from Michael Novak, which is the value that you say is advertised, or the value that the customers are trying to achieve, what are those goals Michael's asking? Is it to save money, create new business models? Is it something else, improving customer experience? Like, what,
Yeah.
broadly speaking, why are people coming to Cognigy? What is it that they're actually trying to
Yeah.
achieve?
This is a great question. It's actually one of my favorite questions. So thanks for asking that. If you look at conversational AI and what it does, it automates calls or chats with customers or employees. You might think, okay, so automation means cost saving, right? So we automate 30% of all calls coming in, which means we need 30% less customer service agents that can handle these calls. The reality couldn't be any further from that, right? This is not true for anyone. And the reason why that's not true for anyone is because no one has a fully staffed contact center. What I mean by that is this, just bear with me for a second. If you have a contact center that is running so efficiently that you can pick up any customer call within 30 seconds, and then you can automate 30% of all calls, then yes, you can reduce your contact center size by 30% and you still have the same level of service. The truth is, most large companies have a contact center where you wait between 30 and 120 minutes before talking to anyone. So now you automate 30%. If you now reduce your contact center staff by 30%, you still have 70% of people wait for 30 to 120 minutes. So it doesn't make any sense, right? So no, the main objective really, because of, I hate using buzzwords, but like the great resignation that's going on, contact centers are never fully staffed. Everyone is struggling with that at the moment. So it's not really cost savings, but it is really improving the customer experience. And an interesting aspect to that is, say you have 1,000 people waiting in queue, and now you can deploy a bot that can handle 30% of cases automatically. Of course, everyone's going to speak to the bot, but in only 30% of cases, it's going to be successful. That means you're taking 300 people out of the queue and you have helped those people immediately, right? So that is a better customer experience for those 300. But it's also better customer experience for the remaining 700, because now the queue contracts and they don't have to wait for as long, right? So it's really about customer satisfaction. If you do have a fully staffed and fully efficient contact center, it can be about cost savings. And it can also be about cost savings if you're not talking about customer service, but if you're talking about employee service. So we, for example, have some projects with a large German automobile manufacturer that if you want to run a project inside of that company, any project, you need to go to the legal department and they quiz you about this project, and there's like 100 questions, and it's a very difficult questionnaire where if you answer this with yes, then you go to page 5 and then I ask you this. It's a compliance check. And this has been automated using Cognigy. So all the rules have been essentially poured into a bot that lives on, I believe, on their intranet. And now this compliance check can be done fully automated. So you can be taken through this questionnaire using a bot. And the result will then be presented to someone from the legal department who can have a 5-minute session with you rather than a 1-hour session they had to do before. Right? So in that sense, it saves time, and that can, of course, then translate into saving money. Right? The part that's mentioned here, creating new business models, that is, I mean, obviously there are new business models that are enabled through this type of technology. Right? So let's take maybe a travel company where you can book flights and hotels. Now, what you could do is maybe 2 days before you fly on holidays, maybe you get pinged on WhatsApp and it goes like, oh, hey, are you already looking forward to your flight? Here's the weather in your destination. And by the way, do you want to book the buggy trip or the desert safari or whatever it is? So you have upsell potential as well. So yes, you can get creative with new business models using this type of technology as well.
Interesting. In terms of, so we've got another question here from Michael. I've got a couple of questions here. I may as well get through these and then we'll move on. One from Michael and one from Roberto, which we'll get to in a sec. We've talked a lot about selling into enterprises. We've talked a lot about the kind of things that enterprises consider when they do go and try and get hold of a technology platform. obviously part of contact centers in large organizations is often some of them are outsourced, and the concept of BPOs, business process organizations, that basically take calls for people. Everybody's been on one of those calls where you call Sky or your Virgin or whatever, and you get put through to someone in the Philippines or India or somewhere like that. Those organizations are really facing huge threats, to be honest, with this technology that can automate calls. What they do basically is sell labor. And in the case that we've kind of just been describing of cost savings and stuff like that, if you can automate 50% of calls that a BPO handles currently and bring that in house with a solution like Cognigy, you're then really the BPOs. If I was managing a BPO, I'd be thinking that we're in real danger here. And so a lot of them have actually started to embrace this concept themselves and do it
Yes.
themselves, create their own bots to then serve the customers and keep hold of those contracts. Have you got any observations? Have you sold to any BPOs? Have you got any observations on what's happening in that side of the space?
Yeah, so there's two things happening here. The one thing is that BPOs are changing their business models, whereas previously you essentially paid for seats. Yeah, so okay, we're a BPO, we're making 100 agents to you available, something like that, or let's say 50 agents at any time a day, stuff like that. They are now embracing new business models that are more outcome focused, right? Resolve customer issues, however they want to resolve them. So and they say, okay, dear customer, we're going to guarantee you 50% of customer issues will be resolved, or 100% will be resolved, whatever. And if they can now automate, they can facilitate cost savings for themselves, of course, the BPOs, which then translates into increased profits directly, right? So we do see BPOs doing that. But I think all of this call, we've been talking about customers or employees directly interacting with bots. There's a big area in conversational AI which we haven't touched on at all, and which is really seeing or really getting a lot of attention now, especially from our enterprise customers as well, which is what we dub agent assist. Mm-hmm. If we can build bots, and we are doing that in several use cases with large BPOs, where we are providing assistance to the agent, so the bot is listening in on the call, it can serve up information as the conversation is progressing. I'll give you an example. Someone is calling in, and maybe the conversation starts with a bot. The bot goes like, okay, how may I help you? Yeah, let's stick with the airline example. I need to change my booking. Okay, then we authenticate the person. We say, okay, what's your booking ID, blah, blah, blah. What's your last name? Okay, authenticated. Well, we'll hand you over to an agent. Now the conversation goes to the agent. The person is already authenticated, and maybe we already know something about this, right? And then the agent goes like, or the agent gets some suggestions of what to say. Maybe, okay, to when would you like to shift your booking? And the customer says, I'd like to move it to next Tuesday. And immediately as the agent, we see the results for next Tuesday for the same route that the customer had booked, right? So we are assisting the agent to be more efficient. There's also the possibility that you don't interact with the bot at the beginning at all, but that you're only interacting with a human on chat or on voice, and the bot is listening into the conversation and providing hints or pulling information from back-end systems, etc. And the agent can also communicate directly with the bot, right? So the bot could say, okay, this, and that, and I say, okay, Tuesday we have a flight at 10:30 a.m. Would this be good for you? You say yes. The agent can click on that on their screen. The bot handles the interaction with the back-end system, changes the booking, and says, okay, here we have the new ticket, and you click, okay, forward to the customer, boom. And it's forwarded to the customer. So this agent assist piece, I believe, is going to be huge and could even be bigger than the direct to customer bot piece, right? Because you're keeping the bots away from the customer, yet you're reaping a lot of the benefits that bots can provide. So I think, especially for BPOs, but really any contact center in the world, this is going to be huge.
Yeah, definitely. It's only just starting to get attention as well, isn't it? I mean, you've got providers creeping up that do things like that, and it's Symbl.ai. Actually, you could I don't know what you currently use, but Symbl.ai, you could potentially use that for within Cognigy, basically to enhance some of that stuff.
Yeah, I actually during doing your intro, I looked at the website. I already sent it off to our head of pre-sales, going, hey, you should take a look at that. It's actually interesting.
It's very powerful. Yeah, agent assist is one, but there's a whole bunch of other stuff that you can do as well, which if you could build that into the Cognigy platform and increase the features and capabilities and stuff. But anyway, yeah, the agent assist is definitely an emerging use case without a doubt. It's almost like giving agents like superpowers, isn't it? So you've got kind of like you got the agent assist side of things. You've got another thing we haven't really spoke about, which is routing, IVR routing. Taking the intent from the user, shepherding them to the right place, stuff like that. And then the question we have from Roberto Munoz, it's probably been cut off, but I can read it. Is we kind of touched on this a little bit, but maybe we can define it a bit more. We can see chatbots in lots of companies, but how many companies have proper digital assistants where they can get things done, changing customer details, opening accounts in an automated way without being redirected to a human section in a website? Maybe we'll come on to IVR routing and some of those other use cases. But first, maybe we can just shed some light on some of the kind of use cases that you're seeing from the automation perspective and the level of automation, the level of transactions that are actually being automated at the moment.
Again, my answer is of course our view on the market, and nobody's really buying a Cognigy license to build what you would dub a chatbot. So I assume from the question that you look at a chatbot like something like an FAQ type of bot, right? Whereas a virtual assistant or digital assistant would be a bot that can actually interact with backend systems and take you through a transaction, right? Whether it's a rebooking or pulling a support ticket or something like that. The bots that are being built with Cognigy are the latter, right? So the digital assistants, they do take you through these full transactions. I personally find the FAQ bots, well, an FAQ can be a good part of a digital assistant, but just a bot that has your website FAQ put into a conversational form, I'm not sure whether that's really very useful, to be honest, right? So the companies we are dealing with are doing transactional bots, and they are building a very advanced transactional bots, right? Really where you can, request invoice copies, change your address, things like that, right? Both on the voice and on the chat side. So that's the majority of work we are seeing, because I think that's also where the ROI is, really.
Yeah, definitely. I always find with FAQ bots that they miss the point a little bit, because they're part of a broader journey, aren't they? A customer doesn't go to the website to get like an FAQ answered all the time. Maybe on some times they might do, but they're usually involved in some degree of a journey. They're trying to get something done. They're trying to get an answer to a question so that they can make a decision that then leads them into the next phase of the journey. And so the FAQ things almost seem to be like a little spot in time that can never really serve the user properly, because when you're in a conversation and you've answered a question, there's something else that needs to be done most of the time. It's part of a broader journey,
It can make sense, right? I mean, if you look at let's take Lufthansa as an example. Lufthansa has many transactional use cases in their bot, but of course there's also relevant FAQ type content, like what type of mask do I need to wear on the airplane?
Yeah.
Right? I mean, there's just one answer to that, right? It's a medical grade or FFP2 mask. I don't know what the answer is, but that is relevant FAQ content, right? And you could probably also find that on the website. And this is also, a lot of people don't see it like that, but FAQ is really like search, right? You're just finding the right answer, right? Whereas asking a question like, okay, how can I cancel my booking? And then you get taken to some other subpage. Yeah, okay, that's also like search, but wouldn't it be better if the bot said, yeah, I can help you cancel the booking. What's your booking? So that's where the transactional case comes in there.
Yeah, and FAQs, I didn't mean to sort of like poo-poo them or something, because I think they are useful, but they're more useful, I find, when they're part of that journey. Like, how do I cancel my booking? Oh, well, I can help you cancel that booking. If you've got your reference number, an FAQ might be, well, where can I find my reference number? Oh, it'll be in the email that we sent you. And so the questions happen as part of the kind of discourse rather than, one-off kind of thing. But anyway, yeah, that's interesting. I'm interested in getting your thoughts on, you've mentioned Lufthansa there, who are doing a lot of different things, transactional things. We've talked about how lots of different clients are automating transactions. We've spoke about agent assist kind of use cases, and all of this stuff happens when, as this happens, the company in question starts to mature, doesn't it? It starts to get a little bit better, starts to reach a degree of scale where you're having conversations that at volume, and you're potentially having conversations across multiple channels. What are some of the the blind spots that you've observed that enterprises have? Like, what are some of the things that everybody overlooks, or they don't think about, or that like they get backed into a corner because they didn't do certain things? Like, what are some of those blind spots that you can identify?
I think one very common blind spot is that you go into a scoping meeting and you talk about use cases that they want to automate. And then you go like, okay, forget about conversational interfaces. So let's say we build an app or a web app or whatever. Do you have the necessary APIs to actually do that transaction? Oh yeah, we need to check. Okay, well, if you need to check and if they don't exist, then you can't automate this use case, right? A conversational agent, whether it's a voice bot, whether it's a chat bot, whether it's embedded in an app or whatever, it doesn't really matter. It's a user interface. That's what it is. Yeah, it's an AI-powered user interface. And the user interface needs to be able to interact with the backend system. So if you don't have your APIs in order, if you don't have the authentication piece in order, etc., to even carry out that transaction, then your bot won't be able to do it either, right? So that is something that you go into these workshops and then everyone goes wild with their ideas, which is great, right? Because it is a very engaging topic, of course. It's very exciting to be building something that you can speak with or chat with. But you need to have these things covered also in the backend. And even if you have the APIs, then another question would be, okay, can they be exposed to the outside world? And then all of a sudden it becomes an infrastructure discussion, right? So I guess the biggest blind spot, if we want to call it that, is and how to fix it is you need to bring everyone in, right? You need to bring your security people in, you need to bring your infrastructure people in, the people who own the process currently on the customer service side or employee service side, and then to come to a solution there, right? But don't look at it as it's just a bot project, because no, it's not. It's complex, right? It's no less complex than building a small website that does that for you. Right?
Yeah. We spoke to Benoit Alvarez last week from Qbox, and we had a really good discussion about how, as teams start to advance and you start to handle more and more conversations, and your kind of models get bigger, the conversations get wider in scope, you have the potential to tie yourself up in knots, basically. And a lot of people who've been doing this for a while that are tuning in will have had conflicts with intents and things like that, where you change one thing on one intent and it impacts another intent and stuff. So there's a bunch of kind of like technical things potentially that you kind of need to be aware of as you kind of begin scaling. You have bots that are handling more use cases and higher volumes. Is there any other things that, aside from that, any other things that you identify from either the design or the implementation side that, let's assume that you've got access to APIs, you can get up and running, you're now starting to serve some customers, you're reaching a degree of scale, you're handling a couple of thousand calls a day or whatever it might be. What maybe is some of the design things or technical things or pointers that you would give people to either make sure they do or don't do as they start to scale this thing?
Well, I think what you should do when you get started is you should ask yourself, why are we doing this? We want to automate something. And then what is that something, right? So you should analyze your existing call logs if you have them, or if you don't have them, speak to the people on the contact center side to see what do we want to automate. Now, if you identify, and in most large enterprise, you can probably identify one or two handful of use cases that make up 80% of the reason why people are calling in. And then you automate those. So let's say it's 10 use cases. Then don't build an intent model that has 1,000 intents. Like you won't require that, right? This is actually also, we spoke about that at the very beginning, small talk. Small talk muddies your intent model as well, right? Because, I mean, what are intents, right? How does intent mapping work? It's statistics. It's measuring the distance between the user input, and it's a very simplified way of putting it, right? But it's measuring the distance between what the user said and the examples that were given. Now, if you have 100 intents for your use cases and 500 small talk intents, there's a high chance your small talk intents get hit, right? Also, we're humans, and we are not good at writing 1,000 clear-cut intents. Like we have tools in the platform, actually patented tools that help our users write better intents, right? So we have this kind of traffic light model where it says, okay, this sentence actually has overlap with this and that intent. But still, I guess my, long story short, I guess my advice would be, well, don't overdo it. automate the main use cases first and then move on from there. Don't start and go like, okay, we're going to automate 50 use cases. You're never going to be done, right? And you can already reap the benefits of only automating 2 use cases at the beginning if you make that clear to the user. Right?
Yeah, interesting. What are you observing in terms of the? I know we've got a few more questions here, which we'll hopefully we can get to shortly. But what are you observing on? We spoke earlier about how we're seeing centers of excellences start to develop. At the same time, there's organizations who maybe is approaching it from a developer point of view, and so there's definitely a skills gap there from perhaps those that are just getting started that maybe can't justify recruiting an entire team just yet because they haven't potentially proven the value and stuff like that. So what are your kind of like observations on some of the core skills that are needed to scale something? Let's say you're an organization, you've got one bot live, it's doing all right, it's managed by IT, you've got a copywriter who feeds in every now and then. What resources and skills will that team need in order to develop themselves into something that can be starting to scale this thing properly?
Well, the first question I would ask the organization is, if you have a well-functioning bot, why is it only staffed with 2 people, right? I mean, if there's big ROI on your bot, why don't you put a team around it and increase the ROI even further, right? What is a well-functioning bot? Is a well-functioning bot a bot that has 20 conversations on your website a day, right? So I think that is the question. If you have made your first forays into the field and you feel that it is going well, then it really is about professionalizing that, right? If you see, okay, there is potential and we could also use this for these 20 other things, then you should really look at using a professional platform. I mean, of course I'm saying that, right? Because we are offering that. No surprise there. But it is true, right? Because using a small tool to build this bot and another small tool to build that one, another small one to build that one, that's not going to be the reality of large enterprises in the future, just like it isn't the reality for CRM systems or CMS systems. If you're a large enterprise, you're going to have, hopefully, one centrally used large CRM system. And we believe, and Gartner actually believes, that large enterprises are moving to a centralized conversational AI infrastructure to harness these synergies that exist when multiple teams work on bots on the same platform, right? Synergies in training, skills transfer, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. And also synergies in actually the model itself. Like I know companies who've got one provider for a chatbot, a different provider in the IVR, and are potentially looking at a different provider to do, so the IVR is routing, but the different provider is to do the self-service. And it's like, not that you need to have the same conversation because the model will be different, the conversation will be different in chat versus voice, but what you lose out on there if you try and go for different solutions every time you want to build a different bot on a different channel is you miss out on that core conversational pattern. You miss out on the opportunity to take a conversation from your chatbot and put it in your IVR with some tweaking and redesign and vice versa.
Analytics, right?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe you can get some analytics from one of the systems that could also be very valuable to improving your other bots. Right?
Yeah. Interesting. We'll close out shortly. We've got a couple of questions there which we might get to. But what is the? We'll get to one is about the metaverse. You can't go a podcast without getting metaverse questions these days. So we'll save that till the end, Mike. What is it now that, so, obviously it's Cognigy is doing really, really well. You mentioned there it's got a really good presence in large organizations, and we're seeing the kind of consolidation of different technologies and currently, settling on one platform. Organizations are maturing, they're developing centers of excellence, they're able to scale, they're reaching, a good volume on calls and conversations, they're starting to see some real results. Where do you see the future heading in this space generally? And then I've got a follow-up question about the Magic Quadrant. But in general terms, where do you kind of see the next 3 years? How would you describe what the industry will be like in 3 years' time if you were to wave a magic wand?
Yeah. I think we will see every large contact center provider embracing this type of technology, right? And the ones that are not are going to be struggling. I think that is big. And I think we will see every large enterprise that has a sizable customer service operation embracing this type of technology, right? Because we hear this over and over again. Large companies are not really differentiating on product anymore, but they're differentiating on service. And we all know that, right? I mean, if you receive great service somewhere, then that's who you want to do business with. But I remember I wanted to buy a car a couple of years ago, and I went into the dealership, and no one spoke to me, right? Maybe it was the way I was dressed, I don't know. And then I literally went to another dealership on the same day, and there was actually a brand I didn't really want to buy, but they were super nice, and I ended up buying the car there, right? And it was really because I felt that they cared. And I think this is the same with service. I think what we are going to see is, obviously we're going to see the automation of customer service that we've spoken about with bots and agent assist. I think we're going to see a lot more proactive service, right? Where, as I said, maybe you're going on a holiday, and then 2 days before you're getting a message that maybe upsells you something, but also gives you value if you don't buy something, right? Like giving you the weather information or stuff like that, right? Or we already see this sometimes, like with some airlines, when you land somewhere, and then the moment you land, you get an SMS telling you which belt to go to collect your luggage, right? And maybe you get a message that unfortunately your luggage didn't make it on the flight, and how to handle that, so you don't have to stand in that line. We all had that experience at one point, right? Waiting for 1 hour in line to then fill out this big form and describe what your luggage looked like and all this kind of stuff. You just want to go to your hotel. It's already knowing the luggage isn't there. So I think this kind of proactiveness in customer service is also something we're going to see massively increase.
Yeah, it preempts things, doesn't it? It's almost like chatbots were used, and still are, to be fair, to almost prevent people from going from the website to the call center. Like, let's put a chatbot there, and let's kind of keep them on the website and save ourselves the call, kind of thing. But if you can be proactive, if you've got the data, it's all crucially relying on the data, isn't it? Is that if you have the data to be able to do that, being proactive and intercepting the customer before they get a chance to need to go to you is inevitably a better customer experience.
That's right.
So two last questions. I know we're very short on time. Very quickly. We'll do the metaverse question, then I'll ask you one more question about the future of Cognigy. So Michael Novak's question is, what is the chatbot role? I would also say voice bot or conversational AI role in emerging metaverses. Is it a gaming companion, a work companion? Is it an interface that will be used to navigate and control those metaverses? I don't know if you've been paying attention to that metaverse kind of stuff as of yet, but your thoughts, generally speaking, on the role of conversational AI in that fledgling space.
It's a good question. So I can tell you, we've been investigating this thing for quite a while, and firstly, it's good fun now that we're all remote because of the pandemic.
Didn't you do a workshop or webinar in VR recently?
We did, yeah, with UiPath.
Yeah.
And we actually conduct several of our meetings per week in VR now in the company, and it's surprisingly good. Of course, we're also nerds, right? We like to try out stuff like that, but it's actually surprisingly good. You can focus very well. Now, to answer the question, I think we put out an article about that on our website as well. I personally believe that the role of conversational AI in the metaverse is going to be huge. Now, why is that? Because when you're in the metaverse, you can't really type anything, right? So you need to communicate with other humans or services via voice, right? So I'm going to rephrase the question a little bit. Like, what is the role of bots in general? And I believe it's going to be voice bots, obviously, right? And maybe if we have a meeting in VR and then we can communicate with the Star Trek-like computer in that virtual reality world, where we can, let's say it's a sales meeting, and I can say, okay, please show us the forecast for Q2 for the Americas, please. Boom. Okay, please whittle that down to only Cognigy Voice Gateway opportunities. Boom. Right, and that's I think this is something that's going to come. Obviously, gaming companions. I mean, yeah, you want to play Halo in VR and you want to be speaking to Cortana, right? That's what you want to do, right? And if you're flying an X-wing, you want to be able to speak to R2D2 in the back. So I think voice will play a big role in that. We actually we did a video about that in 2017 where we built a Unity 3D based world, a kind of Viking world, and we had a little dragon flying around, and it was actually in VR. You could walk around and you can ask the dragon to do things, and you can deal with a merchant using your voice and things like that. And it was early days back then, but I think it will definitely come. Whether we'll be a player in that, let's see. We're very focused on enterprise and service, of course. But will bots play a big role in the metaverse, or will voice control and voice communication play a big role? I'm very certain of that. Yes.
Interesting. And final question as we wrap up: what, with the Magic Quadrant now, being placed in the leader, a very small number of companies are in that quadrant. It's obviously tremendous marketing power, tremendous validation for prospects and stuff like that. What is it going to enable for you, and what does the next kind of like 12 to 18 months look like for Cognigy?
Yeah. I think the great thing that it does, it really helps us to answer the question, why Cognigy and not one of the other 1,000 so-called conversational AI platforms, right? It's easy to whack that label onto your software. Yeah, we're a conversational AI platform. We have only really existed for 2 months, but we're a conversational AI platform, right? So now we can say, okay, here's external validation of what an enterprise conversational AI platform is. And there are really only a handful of leaders in the market, and we are one of them, right? So they don't have to take it from us, but they can actually now look at external validation, and I believe it's fantastic. It's really a team achievement, right? Both in terms of building the product, marketing the product, selling the product, but also in terms of preparing for this Magic Quadrant, which is a very tough exercise. You put a lot of effort into that, but you learn a hell of a lot by going through that process as well. Right, and we had to prepare a video for the Magic Quadrant evaluation, and we are now using those. I think it's actually 13 different videos. We're now using them for internal training, right? Because they go so deep in the product, and it's So it was a great experience for us, and of course the outcome we believe will also be tremendous, not just for us but for the market as a whole, because it is the first Gartner Magic Quadrant on enterprise conversational AI platforms.
Definitely brings it into the big time, so to speak, or the mainstream. I think when a company like Gartner, I know they've done other things with conversational AI platforms in the past, but putting a Magic Quadrant together, I think, is a good sign, to be fair. Roberto says, very good session. Thank you for sharing. So I couldn't agree more, Roberto. Thank you so much, Phil, for joining us. It's been absolutely, the time's just gone. I can't believe that what the time is. It's just absolutely flown. I've really enjoyed it. For those that are tuning in on the podcast or tuning in on LinkedIn or YouTube, if you want to check out Cognigy, go to cognigy.com. That's cognigy.com. Phil, any other resources that you would point people to? Any other ways that they can learn a bit more about Cognigy?
Well, you can find most of it on the website. If you go to the website, if you want to get your hands onto the tool, there's a free trial in the upper right where you can register. There's also academy.cognigy.com if you want to find the free training classes we spoke about. That includes conversational design training, which is not Cognigy specific, right? So even if you are currently using another platform, this could be interesting for you. Exactly, there we go. That's the link. So yeah, and the rest you can find on the website or on our YouTube channel. So we publish a lot of videos on our YouTube channel with showcases of what can be done with Cognigy, etc. So yeah, thank you very much for having me on the show. I think it was a great discussion, and looking forward to the next time.
Likewise. Really appreciate it. It's been absolutely immense. Thank you so much for joining us. Next week, for those tuning in, we'll be speaking to the UJet CEO, Anand, speaking to Anand next week on Wednesday. So please do join us for that. We might touch on some of this stuff in terms of how. So UJet's a CCaaS provider, so we might be talking a little bit more about the contact center side of things and how they integrate with companies like Cognigy and others. So please do join us for that. But Phil, this has been absolutely immense. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an unbelievable conversation. I really appreciate it.
Great. Thanks.